If I could describe Kelowna in a few words, I would say that it is a city of stark contrasts, both in terms of culture and the natural environment. I was taking in the sights on Lake Shore and Ellis Roads, and on one side I would see like this old sugar daddy in a sports car dropping off his young sugar baby at her job at like a bougie hotel, and then I would walk across the street and I'm in the industrial part of town where there are makeshift shelters and like a bunch of homeless people tweaking out in plain sight. That being said, this was definitely not a time without issues. The thought of being pregnant definitely did cross my mind. Hello, lovely ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Katchin Up with Kat, where I take you back in time to when I was living in my camper van. It has now been about 2.5 months since I took my winter hiatus, and I feel like I've moved past the stage of mourning the loss of my past, and now I'm really looking forward to the future and getting excited to gear up and get out again. However, there's still at least a couple more months of winter here on Vancouver Island, which is pretty mild. There isn't any snow, but it rains incessantly, so I still can't go back into the van. And I still don't really know what to do with myself on a day-to-day basis. You know, I know what I want to do 5 months from now, but ask me what I'm doing tomorrow and I fucking can't tell you shit about that. Probably just sitting at home watching Netflix and dealing with my existential anxiety of not feeling like I'm doing enough. But hey, it's coronavirus time, so most people are kind of in the same boat. But anyways, back to the actual content of this video. So we are going back in time to my second month on the road. I am now traveling further east into British Columbia and exploring the Okanagan region. I spent a bunch of time in Kelowna, so that's where this episode is set. It's very interesting camping in that area, and I was definitely dealing with a lot of more challenges at this stage of my van life journey. One of the main ones was the fact that I lost my period for the first time in my life, and I genuinely thought I was pregnant. So we'll get into all of that in this video. So the way that I'm going to start off this video is with a little journal entry about my first impressions going into this new part of British Columbia. I drove into Kelowna and was immediately greeted by striking views of the sprawling riverside town creeping up and down the mountains and valleys of the region. The mountains in the Okanagan are quite different from those that I saw in eastern British Columbia. They are much shorter and flatter, like someone pressed their hand down on a chain of giant sand castles, making them look like thick pancakes. So, with that being said, let's get into the story. Kelowna is the largest city in the interior of British Columbia, and that is where I spent most of my time in the Okanagan. If I could describe Kelowna in a few words, I would say that it is a city of stark contrasts, both in terms of culture and the natural environment. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, first off, I actually want to share a cool little thing that I recently found out about what Kelowna stands for. So it is part of the local indigenous language, the Okanagan language, and it means grizzly bear. The environment around the town is very interesting. I was there during the summer, and it is one of the hottest and driest areas of British Columbia. The natural environment is quite arid and not necessarily desert-like, but you can tell that it is a place that is constantly threatened by fires, and as a result of that, the local species reflect the adaptations of being able to live in such hot and dry climate. And yet, even so, it's immediately juxtaposed by these lush man-made orchards all across the town, and this large crystalline river running across the city as well. So it was very interesting to see the difference between the natural environment and the artificial environment. Kelowna and the Okanagan in general is actually one of the most fertile regions of BC. A lot of the farming is done there, and most of the fruiting trees are found in this region as well. And that was one of my favorite things about being in town. You know, you would drive across the major roads and there are just literally pastures or farm stands on all sides of you, at least in the southern part of the city. And yet, even with all this bountiful harvest going on, it is a place that is really threatened by fires, like I mentioned, in the summer. And so the species that live there naturally have some interesting adaptations. One species in general that I found really cool was the ponderosa pine. And I actually have a little video of Old Cat discussing a little bit more about that, so I'm going to add that now.
This looks like it's been burnt. And you see how like the bark is a lot redder and flakier and tacky, and crisp on this side compared to, okay, this tree's like pretty fucked. You can see how the edges are charred from fire compared to those ones, which are the same tree species. So this is a defense mechanism that they have to protect the tree from fire. And that would make sense why the very bottom branches up here are all stubby and covered in moss. Like those probably burnt off during the fire, all up there, but the very top layer is still thriving. So very, very, very cool.
In terms of the culture itself, it is also quite contrasting. There is a large proportion of very wealthy people and also very poor people. And because it is a smaller size city, the contrast between the two seems a lot more evident, at least for me when I was walking down the major roads. I was taking in the sights on Lakeshore and Ellis roads, and on one side I would see like this old sugar daddy in a sports car dropping off his young sugar baby at her job at like a bougie hotel, and then I would walk across the street and I'm in the industrial part of town where there are makeshift shelters and like a bunch of homeless people tweaking out in plain sight. It was really interesting to see that and see how normalized it is. I also found out that apparently Kelowna is a place with equal proportions of both women and men in their homelessness population, which is quite different from other places where the majority of homeless people are men. So, I guess you could say in a morbid way that's equality, but not the kind that any of us would want. I heard from a local that the town itself is often referred to as Kelowna-fornia, probably because both its environment and culture kind of reflect a California lifestyle. There are, as I mentioned, there are a lot of affluent people in town, and apparently because of that, there kind of is a culture of exclusivity. A lot of people are known as like users and abusers and don't really take well to outsiders who aren't at their same level financially. Like people are just trying to climb up and use each other in that regard. And apparently also this is a place where a lot of NHL players and their families come to settle down, so that kind of adds to the whole affluence. But take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. I found this out from this 18-year-old girl that worked in a hippie shop who I got to talking with, and she was like, yeah, I grew up here, but like I'm about to leave to the East Coast to study university in PEI because I can't deal with this culture and this place anymore. So that's her perspective of growing up in that town. However, when she was describing to me all of this, I did kind of note that it reminded me of the show 90210. And another shopper who overheard my conversation definitely agreed with me with that observation. So there you have it. You could go there and make your own decisions on what kind of culture it is and the people that are there, but that is what I was told. Nonetheless, it is an absolutely beautiful place to be, and I didn't really spend that much time in town. I mostly was up in the mountains. It is one of my favorite places to camp for free. You know, you would drive 20 minutes out of town and you're up in Okanagan Provincial Park with a spectacular view of the crystalline Okanagan Lake around you and access to like a private nude beach down below, and no one really bothered you if you spent the night in the parking lot because it was like pretty out there. Another one of my favorite spots to camp was up on Kelowna Mountain, like about 10-minute drive further like southeast, I would say, and the Guillard Recreation Trail was probably my go-to place to camp during the entire week I was there. It just has striking flora and an amazing view of the city of Kelowna down below, especially at night. Just the twinkling of all the lights was so beautiful and so tranquil. And because it was up in the mountains, no one ever bothered you. I was pretty much the only person there most of the time. So that was pretty awesome, especially since driving there was a lot less risky and intensive of a journey than my usual camping spots are, because I like to really go on those backcountry roads. But in Kelowna, you didn't really need to drive out too far to get out of the town and up in the mountains and experience just spectacular views all to yourself. So in terms of where I was in my own van life journey at this time when I was in Kelowna, this was a period where my van finally started to feel like home, and I was super comfortable being on the road. You know, I had moved out a couple months before that and my van was pretty much good to go, but there was a few kinks left and some renovations that I couldn't get to before I left on my journey. So those were finally dealt with, and I mentioned that in my previous video, so I will leave that linked below and you can go check it out after you watch this video if you want some context. So once I got into Kelowna with all of my renovations done, I really just went ham on the thrift stores, getting a bunch of home goods and really just making the space finally feel like my own, you know, with all the finishing touches. And I will say Kelowna is a great place to go thrifting. The city is so small and there's at least like 20 thrift and consignment stores all across town. So even if you don't have a car, like you can walk a couple of blocks and hit up 4 at the same time. And when I say thrift stores, I mean they're actually thrift stores. You know, like especially when you go into larger cities, you would find that prices are a bit inflated. And don't get me wrong, there are some consignment stores in town which are a bit overpriced, but if you hit up the actual thrift stores, it is extremely reasonably priced and a great place to get just whatever home good essentials and anything else you may need for your van. On top of that, I felt like I was pretty competent in terms of my ability to navigate the day-to-day of being in the van. You know, I was starting to really get into a flow of easily finding places to stay at night and then being able to pack up and go explore during the days. It was a really awesome time where I was finally feeling comfortable both in my environment and my ability to navigate newer environments that I was being exposed to at the time. That being said, this was definitely not a time without issues. I was dealing with multiple inconveniences, nothing too serious, but they definitely compounded over time. One of the things I didn't anticipate was frying my very expensive Goal Zero solar powered battery. And how I did that basically was the storage box that I had built, which I mentioned in my previous video, which was supposed to be a protective shell to house that along with my fridge and all the other bits and bobs that I didn't have anywhere else to store. I didn't realize that I probably should have drilled some aeration holes because the temperatures in the van climbed very drastically when I was in the Okanagan. Like I mentioned, it is a very hot and dry environment, and the internal temperatures in my car during the day probably exceeded like 40 degrees Celsius. So as a result of that, my battery, which needs to be cooled off at times and have air circulation, just really struggled in that confined place. and because of that, I kind of ruined its ability to hold a charge. It still works. I can still charge my devices on it. Right now, all I'm using it for is my Dometic fridge, which is very energy efficient. But I found because I fried it in that box and I let it overheat, it now has issues with holding a charge for longer than a day. Even if it is a completely sunny day and my battery is fully charged, I noticed that by the next morning it was absolutely drained and my fridge was dead, which kind of sucked and became a more serious issue, especially when I transitioned my van life journey from summer to fall and there were less consistently sunny days. I really struggled with keeping that battery charged and keeping my fridge on. So food rot became a very persistent issue that I was dealing with in my van life journey. As of right now, I have no plans of replacing any of those two items because, as I mentioned in my previous video, I also broke my fridge right before this. So both still work. Not at optimal capacity, but I make do with it nonetheless, and I just try to keep less fresh food in my fridge and eat it more quickly. So yeah, I have to go shopping much more frequently, but there's always trade-offs with things. So heed my warning, if you are going to build a storage box to house any of your supplies, make sure that you have aeration holes in it because you don't want to fry your batteries. Those things were kind of just minor inconveniences and didn't really bother me. The thing that bothered me the most was the fact that I lost my period for the first time in my life. If you're not aware, losing your period is a very serious concern. Even if you're not pregnant, a healthy young woman should not just miss a period for a month or more at a time. Like, that is reflectant of some more serious issues going on that need to be dealt with. And so I was like very concerned about that, and the thought of being pregnant definitely did cross my mind. You know, if I'm being honest, I was having unprotected sex with multiple men right before this. And although I have an IUD and I try not to let guys come inside of me, I knew the risk of being pregnant was probably very low, but not impossible. So that was something that I was concerned about, especially when I realized that my period was 10 days late. So I took a pregnancy test and luckily it came out negative. Sorry to clickbait y'all, but I was not pregnant on the road and I did not have to deal with the physical and moral ramifications of having an abortion. So dodged a bullet there, but I'm still young and fertile, so gonna be more careful moving forward. But either way, that still didn't answer the question as to why I lost my period in the first place. So now I'm gonna add another little video of old me explaining a little bit more about that situation.
Hey y'all, so I have some great news to share with you this morning. I'm not pregnant. So you're probably asking why I took this test, which kind of sounds a little self-evident. You know, my period is now 11 days late and I have had unprotected sex with 2 men in the last 2 weeks, so there was a chance that I could have been pregnant, although I wasn't too concerned about it because I knew the risk would have been pretty low. So yeah, I figured out like 2 days ago that my period was like 9 days late, and I'm like, oh shit, that's a lot. I should probably figure out why. So I got the test. It says that I'm not pregnant, but then the question still remains, why is my period so late? Like, it's not okay to be 11 days late. And so I did some research and I found out that apparently really hot weather can actually delay or just cause you to skip your period. And it doesn't work if like you're, you know, just in a hot like day outside and then you go back to like air conditioning or whatever. Like, that won't dysregulate your body that much. But seeing as I'm freaking living outside, sorry, there was a wasp trying to eat my doso. No, I did not make enough to share for other people. That is all mine. Anyways, yeah, so like hot weather is supposed to influence your cycle at times, like especially if you're just prolonged exposure to heat, which I definitely am, because the interior of BC, like the Okanagan Valley, is like fucking hot as shit. Even at like 7 p.m. when the sun is going down, it's fucking hot as shit. And I'm like basically living outside the entire summer. Like I haven't been to someone's house since I've gotten past Castlegar, so like I'm literally in the thick of things. So it would make sense why I've been feeling a little off and I haven't had my period. So yeah, that's just a little update for you.
Something that I didn't mention in that video, which I didn't realize until a couple months later on my journey, which probably contributed to the fact that I lost my period, was that at this time, my body was going through some really major changes. Like over the course of the summer, I lost a lot of weight very unexpectedly. Now, I'm not really someone who weighs themselves, so I can't really tell you how much I weighed beforehand or even how much I weigh now. But what I can say is that within a couple of months of being on the road, I went from being a size large to a size small. And I probably dropped at least 4 dress sizes. And this totally came out of the blue for me. I was not even trying to do this when I got into the van. It kind of just happened naturally, which made me feel really good about myself because I'm someone who has struggled with my weight my entire life. You know, from kindergarten to 6th grade, my nickname was Katerina Faterina. So that really screwed me up and led me on this journey of struggling with body dysmorphia and disordered eating all throughout my adolescence. I always like dieted when I was a kid and it was very hard for me to lose weight. So it was really awesome to know that, you know, just by changing up my lifestyle and taking charge of my nutrition and being more active, which is kind of what is going to happen when you're living in a van. Like you can't just sit in your van all day, like your body just physically will hurt. So you move around a lot more. And that's all it really took for me to shed off all the unnecessary weight on my body. But more than just exercise, I think the thing that was most important to my weight loss was just falling in love with food again. Believe it or not, I'm actually a really good cook. But when I was living at home with my parents, I never really wanted to cook. I never really had any inspiration, and I guess that was just a contributing factor of my overall just depressive state, but I just never really wanted to cook anything. I never knew what to cook, even though I'd have a fridge full of food. My parents were the people who like did grocery shopping, and so I would mostly just eat like the desserts and sandwiches my mom would bring home. And because I was in university at that time, I was definitely more sedentary, and as a result of that, I was a lot heavier than I am now. But when I got onto the road, I really started to enjoy the process of cooking food again and connecting with that aspect of myself. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that I was really making a concerted effort to mostly buy farm fresh produce. And wherever I was traveling, I really loved to just explore new ingredients that I've never tried before and make all these cool recipes. Genuinely play with my food, you know. I know what kind of ingredients taste good together, so I was just creating recipes that I've never created before.
So tonight's dinner is my take on sag paneer, but instead of spinach, I have Swiss chard because that's what I got at the farmer's market, plus a lot of other veggies that I love. And then I made dosa for the first time. Installment of Camper Chef Cat, we are making fried chicken and fire roasted vegetables with beautiful company in the wild. Guys, I have seriously outdone myself this time. Like, I made some amazing recipes on the road, but this shit right here would make an Italian Nonna cry.
So because I was moving my body every day and nourishing myself properly, I guess it was really easy for me to melt off all that unnecessary fat, which was really great, but I guess because it happened so suddenly, my body kind of just was thrown for a loop, and so that's kind of why I lost my period. Luckily, the next month it came back and my weight did not come back, so that is pretty great. I am feeling a lot more healthier and really just valuing this new body that I'm in. I will say, after losing weight, just because my body has changed doesn't mean my relationship with my body has changed as much. You know, in some sense, yes, I am growing and moving past the trauma of my childhood and just the constant conditioning of having to be slim or look a certain way. But I would be lying if I said that I don't compulsively look at myself in the mirror every day when I wake up to see if I gained any weight, and really fearing doing so, especially since I lost the weight. I've almost kind of put this pressure on myself, believing that if I gain weight, it would almost be a failure. It would almost be like a step back in time, and that's really triggering for me. I'm definitely still dealing with some body dysmorphia issues, but you know, I'm trying my best to just focus on my health and nutrition. I definitely value just feeling good in my body every day and working it to the best of my abilities, giving it the movement and the nutrition it needs. You know, I definitely am eating a lot healthier and I love working out, but I still have a lot of work to do in terms of my relationship with myself and trying to get to a place of body neutrality, you know, not feeling either good or bad about myself, but rather just accepting my body as it is and accepting the fact that it will continue to change with the seasons and as I progress in life. You know, it is currently winter right now, so it's harder for a lot of people to maintain the same level of physical activity as they do during the summer. I myself, as well as probably a lot of other people out there, tend to want to eat more comfort food at this time, but as a result of that, we gain weight. Right? And that's all right. It's fundamentally is all right. And I know that I am in a lot healthier of a place in my life than I've ever been. So I am just trying to be gentle and kind with myself and continue to have fun with my food and have fun moving my body. And I'm very grateful for just being in the van and having the opportunity to really thrive. So above all, I am very grateful for all the changes that happened to me when I was in the van, both physical, mental, and even spiritual. It really was a time that allowed me to thrive and step into myself. So with that, I am going to end this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe to my channel. It would really help me out, and stay tuned to the next episodes because this is when shit starts to really get real. I am going to share a lot more emotionally difficult times of this journey. In the next episode, I am going to tell you about the time when my friend from back home came to visit me and spent 2 weeks in my van. And within the course of those 2 weeks, our relationship was absolutely ruined. So stay tuned for that shit show of a story. It is going to be in the next episode. And with that, I will leave you. Thank you so much for watching Catching Up with Kat.